Hi, my name is Chelsea Williamson, and the topic I chose was motivation. And the question I built around this topic was, what role does motivation play in second language acquisition? So I wanted to see what is the importance of motivation in second language acquisition. To do this, I began as all of the research articles that I read began, which was, how do you define motivation, which is actually harder than you might think. Oops, I'm sorry. There we go. How do you define motivation? So the first little topic I have, the first definition is kind of the broad general definition that we would probably come up with if we're asked to define motivation. And the next two are very more detailed, and I like them better because of that, those details. So the first one says, it is the attribute that moves us to do or not to do something. And then we have, it is an internal process that activates, guides, and maintains behavior over time. And the last one says, it refers to a process that begins with a need and leads to a behavior that moves an individual towards achieving a goal. And I really like these two because they define motivation as a process. And I've never seen motivation defined as that before, but especially in terms of second language acquisition, you can see that is very true, that motivation is indeed a process. And that the action, and also that it leads to something. So it can lead towards achieving a goal, or it maintains the behavior over time. So motivation is something that's lasting. It leads to lasting goals. Then we move on to the types of motivation. These two types, intrinsic and extrinsic, come from something called the self-determination theory. And I'm going to begin with intrinsic over here. And it's just the desire to do something because it's worthwhile, or it's motivation that comes from an interest or curiosity. So it kind of has three subcategories. You have intrinsic motivation knowledge. So that's the enjoyment you get from knowing new things. Then you have intrinsic motivation accomplishment, and that's the pleasure you get from accomplishing goals. And then you have intrinsic motivation stimulation, which is the joy of doing the task. So when you're intrinsically motivated, your motivation is internal. And then you have extrinsic motivation right here. And that's a willingness to do something because of the benefits. And I like this down here. It's a means to an end. So this one is kind of like a spectrum. It has also subcategories that are kind of like a spectrum. On one end, you have unwillingness. And this is called external regulation, where a learner's actions are to get a reward. So without that reward, you would be unwilling to learn a language or acquire a language. Then you have passive compliance, and that's called introjected regulation, where a learner's actions are due to external pressure. For example, you're learning a language so that you don't feel ashamed for not knowing it or left out for not knowing it. And then you have active personal commitment. And this is identified regulation, where you have a personally relevant reasons to learn this language or acquire this language. So for example, maybe you're getting a pay raise or a job raise because of this. If you are able to be bilingual, you get something out of it. So you have a commitment into learning this language. And then we have integrative and instrumental motivation. Integrative it occurs when a learner tries to or has a desire to integrate themselves with the culture of the second language group. So they really want to learn everything that goes with the language as well, the people and the culture that belongs to the language. They want to be a part of it themselves, to be socially involved. And then you have instrumental, and that is a means to get academic or economic reward through the learning of a second language. So this is a lot of people, I saw some researchers have said that they don't really see a difference between intrinsic and extrinsic and integrative and instrumental. And these two terms came from Gardner and his socio-educational model. And they don't really see a difference between the two. And actually, Gardner's social and educational model became first, and intrinsic and extrinsic came second. Another thing about integrative and instrumental motivation, if they seem familiar, they should. In our textbook, The Principles of Language Learning and Teaching, these are actually called orientation. So it's integrative orientation and instrumental orientation. And that's because some people had a bit, they didn't really agree with calling these types of motivation. They said they're orientations. So if you're culturally or socially oriented, then you have integrative orientation. And integrative orientation is just learners who wish to integrate themselves in the culture of the second language group. So it's the same as the types of motivation, but just a different term. A lot of terminology confusion is I saw in when I was looking up motivation. Okay, next, my second part of my question was, what role does motivation play in second language acquisition? So I want to get more into what is acquisition and how is it different from learning? Because a lot of my research articles, some use the terms interchangeably, some made the distinct difference between the terms. And so I turned to Krashen, a name we all know well. And I actually got this specific quote from him from one of the articles we used in class. So in this quote, Krashen says that acquisition requires meaningful interaction in the target language, and he calls this natural communication, in which speakers are concerned not with the form of their utterances, but with the messages that they are conveying and understanding. So he basically said that natural communication is key and important, and because it's all about the message that we are trying to get across and have understood. So it's more important to be understood than to be right in our, like, grammatically speaking. And then acquisition versus learning, one article broke this down beautifully, I thought. And they said that learning differs from acquisition and that the individual is making deliberate and conscious efforts that focus on correctness and accuracy to speak the language. And they said that this can at times hinder fluency. Therefore, when one is introduced to the language at an older age, it is first learned, coupled with comprehension, and then acquired. And this really reminded me of those videos that we watched in class of the babies that showed how they acquire language from 0 to 2 years old, because that is how Krashen really, that's what Krashen really means when he says we should acquire language through just natural communication, because babies, when they start learning languages, they don't even know what's right or wrong, or they don't care about correctness. That excuse me, all babies and children, young children wanted to do is get their message across and be understood. And that is how Krashen says we should be acquire language through natural communication in that way. However, this one, I saw that other researchers don't agree. Like this one said it should be learned and coupled with comprehension and then acquired. They said that learning and acquisition does not have to be so diverse. It does not have to be separated. It can be, you can do this both together. And it's actually better if you do. So Krashen believed that motivation in second language acquisition, Krashen and Gardner were two names I saw popped up a lot. So Krashen believed that acquisition is more important than learning. And he really believed in natural communication, and a lot of trial and error will be involved. And he had the theory of second language acquisition, as we know, which had 5 main hypotheses: the acquisition learning hypothesis, the monitor hypothesis, the natural order hypothesis, the input hypothesis, and as you can see here, the effective filter hypothesis. And I included this one because it deals with motivation. And this just says that affective variables, they play a helpful role in second language acquisition. And motivation is one of the 3, with self-confidence and anxiety being the other 2. And basically, he said if you have, let's say, high anxiety, low self-confidence, and low motivation, then a kind of block or wall will be hindering you from acquiring a second language. However, if you have low anxiety with high self-confidence and a good, healthy motivation, then it'll be easier for you to acquire a second language. So he did believe that motivation played a helpful role in second language acquisition. And then we have Gardner. Now, Gardner, he gave us those 2 terms, integrative and instrumental motivation is how he called them before they became orientation. And he really believed in the integrative motivation. And he said that integrative motivation is a broad range of factors about the language learner. So their background, their interests, their openness and respect for the culture of the second language. And he said that motivational intensity, and which is like just your desire to learn a language, so how much effort you'll put into learning a language, and the attitudes you have towards learning the language all play a role in something he called the integrativeness. And when it comes to learning the language. And he believed integrative motivation was a key construct in his socio-educational model. And it also included the factor of your motivation because of in the classroom. So he also included like he said that your teacher in the context of your classroom can also affect your motivation for learning another language. And this next chart you see, I saw it referenced in a lot of the articles that concern Gardner and his socioeducational model, and it just shows all the factors that influence motivation. So your desire to learn the second language, the effort you put into it, your attitudes towards learning the second language. And then again, I told you that some use this in the actual classroom. So it says the attitudes of the learning situation, the evaluation of the teacher, the evaluation of the course, and then that term integrativeness. And so you have the integrative orientation, the interest in foreign languages, the attitudes towards the L2, those all form the integrativeness, which forms the motivation. However, there was some controversy about the terminology that Gardner used. A lot of people said they were confused by what he actually meant by motivation. Did he mean integrative motivation was motivation? How did he define it? And Gardner actually ended up coming back by saying that there are, he said throughout the literature that the term motivation has different meanings to different individuals. So the term itself can be confusing, and he admitted that. So motivation and second language acquisition. What are our conclusions? So I do believe, and a lot of researchers do believe, that motivation is needed for second language acquisition and second language learning. And I believe that intrinsic or integrated motivation is best. A lot of people said they don't see the difference between the intrinsic or integrated motivation, which is why I included both of them. But I believe they are more important than the extrinsic or instrumental, because those are external factors that can go away, or the importance of them can shift depending if someone takes it away or lessens the value of it, and therefore it lessens the value of you to learn the second language or acquire the second language. But if you have intrinsic or integrative, if you're intrinsically or integratively motivated, then you are more, I believe you are more capable of acquiring the language, because once again, motivation is a process and you will need to be motivated throughout that whole process. And if you have desires such as wanting to be a part of the culture of the second language, then you are more likely to acquire the second language. But I also believe that a learner should reflect and understand their motivations. In some articles I saw, they use these motivations as in the classroom perspective for like how teachers should approach, or how you should use this use the motivation in the classroom for your learners. But I also believe that a learner could benefit without, if they don't even want to be in the classroom, they could benefit from reflecting and understanding their own motivations, so they can, as Gardner said, when it comes to integrative motivation, it's all about the background of the learner, so their interests and their openness and where they come from in regards to learning languages. Do they already have some languages that they have acquired in the past? So I believe that learners should reflect and understand their own motivations before they begin the process that is second language acquisition. And I thank you for following me with motivation and second language acquisition. And I hope that you agree with me that motivation plays an important role in second language acquisition. And this is my works cited page. I have my 5 resources, as you can see. Thank you very much for listening.